Well, good. Well, it's good to have you guys here. Obviously, Terry's not, so it's just me today, and we actually have a fairly heavy subject, which we'll get to, hopefully, depending if we get through a first couple of slides. But we've been talking about, I guess, the heart of the matter, which is from Matthew 5:21 through 37. And this is where we talk about murder, right? It's not about the murder. It's about whether you hate. And then about calling somebody a fool, about leaving your gift at the altar and making reparations with those, or being reconciled with those you are around, settling matters quickly, and then we're going to jump into adultery this week. So that's where we've been with Heart of the Matter. So a review over the last couple of weeks. If Jesus were serious, then we will not cultivate our anger. How have you guys done with your anger this week? Has this been a good week? So? Good. Been remembering what we've been talking about? If Jesus was serious, then we will not contribute to our outrage culture. How has that been this week? Have you felt yourself beginning to get outraged? Have you been talking about things with people, or have you been calming? Have you been the calming effect? Has it been going okay? And then we've talked about, if Jesus was serious, then we will recognize every person as valuable, right? We won't have that contempt, right? And what does contempt look like? I don't know. Terry threw this slide in here. I don't know if that's a contemptible look or not, but we kind of know what that look is, right? Or that feeling in our heart when we look at somebody with contempt. Yeah. Have you shown contempt to anybody this week? Or have you had to stop yourself from showing contempt this week? Yeah. That's unfortunately maybe the harder part, right? Is you can feel it coming sometimes. Yeah. Okay. So this week, we're moving on to chapter 20 of the book. If Jesus was serious, then no one should be invisible. No one should be invisible. Who are the invisible in our communities?
Homeless.
The homeless. Who else? Who are the invisible in our communities or in your life? Do we have any? We seem to. Yeah. And then, interesting question here. Are the invisible an indication of our feelings toward them? Based on anger or outrage or the value of what we see them in society? This is a tough question. So when we talk about the homeless, right? Normally, you probably don't have a significant emotion. Maybe it's some pity. But I'll tell you a story. A couple of years ago, when we didn't live here, I came to Peoria, left one of the downtown, it was in the summer, so I left one of the downtown hotels to walk and watch a game at the, whatever the stadium is, the Dozer Stadium. So between one of those downtown hotels and Dozer Stadium, 4 or 5 blocks, I gave more money to homeless during that walk than it cost me to get into the game and for my hot dog. So the question is how do I feel when about every half a block, someone's coming up to me and asking for money? Right? Normally, we don't have a lot of that emotion, but when that continually happens, do you show that same compassion on the first person that you do on the 4th or 5th person that hits you up? And I don't know, maybe they could see that I was handing out money and it just kept coming. But how do we really feel towards them after that?
To the point where you just get indifferent, maybe. Like, I'm point now where I'm like, I don't want to give it where I can't, or I'm like, wallet's empty, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of just ignore, if you can't, they're not, I think that might be part of the invisible. They're just not there.
That's right. And that's right. And again, this is the tough one, because we all know stories of somebody who comes and begs for money who doesn't really need it, right? but that's hopefully not the majority. I mean, you don't know their story. Exactly. We absolutely do. And then they become a part of the invisible. Absolutely. Absolutely. It is really hard. But again, then you have a group of people theoretically that become invisible, that yeah, we've made these judgments, and it may be or it may not be valid. But it's normally, we don't have a big emotional response to this, but a lot of times it's because they've already become a part of the invisible to us, right? We've already just kind of let them go. Yes. Yeah. And when, yes, it becomes a part of the landscape, and that's dangerous, right? So any others a part of our community that are essentially just disappearing into the, the we don't cares of society?
Seniors that are shut in sometimes.
Yeah. And again, here's a group of people that we don't necessarily have a negative emotion for, except that it takes away time, right? It's annoyance. Oh, somebody needs our help again. It starts to follow into this, I would just rather not see them or be bothered by them.
I think this one is an important thought for our church here, because we, among our membership, have shut-ins, elderly people who can't get out. And maybe part of it is a communication where we don't let people know who they are. But I think they become invisible because I forget. And I call somebody and talk with them or whatever, and then forget about it for, oh my goodness, it's been 6 months now or something, and I've been calling other people doing things, forgot about them. Well, now it's like, oh, I don't want to call them because they're going to be upset and I haven't called them.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But if we could all keep this from happening, that they're not invisible, but even if one person a month decides thought about that person to call them, at least they know somebody is thinking about it.
Right.
Yeah. But I think that we can do a lot better job right here.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely. We can always do better. And when was the last time you were a part of the ignored? Can you think back to a time in your life and how that's felt? That's never fun, and I guess specific to this chapter, we're talking about, I guess the third comment here, cultivating anger toward a person is dangerous, but having contempt for someone is even worse. It's the goal of ignoring that person together. And in this context of these, it's like 3 or 4 chapters, it's really in the context of anger and contempt and outrage becomes ignoring, but we can ignore in so many different ways. And it's so hurtful. Yes.
Another group that in my mind is, of course, we work with the prisoners in the prison ministry, and I think it's very easy for us to feel contempt or, well, they got what they deserve.
They got what they deserve.
Yeah. And I always think of that verse there, but for the grace of God go I. I mean, some of these people, situations that they ended up getting in the prison were like literally being at the wrong place at the wrong time, or and some of them have no one, because once they go in, a lot of times their family has totally disowned. They don't want to have anything to do with them, and I don't know their story.
That's right.
A lot of them need, all of us need God. So
that's right.
Too.
That's right. So we're talking about, those in prison. And so easily they can become the ignored. Yeah, and I guess the point you brought up there, for the grace of God go I, a lot of this of what we've been talking about is, okay, so I haven't murdered, but I've shown hate, right? It's not much of a step sometimes. As soon as you're cultivating that anger and that hate in your heart, it's not that far. And in fact, Jesus said, right? Maybe you haven't murdered, but don't even hate, because that's where it leads. And again, to the last point here, if all people are worthy of Christ's sacrifice, just like the prisoners who maybe got what they deserved, we must not treat them as unworthy or invisible.
Like the man who killed my stepsister, killed my stepsister, still hasn't been sentenced, and he's going to prison for the rest of his life. That's what I want to see. Is that bad?
That's a tough question. So is wanting somebody to go to prison for what they did considered hate? Is that considered a bad thing? Anybody want to address that one? Yeah. Yeah. So there's always a careful step between justice, but then our emotions, right? What do you feel inside towards this person long term, right? Obviously, when something just happens like this, there is going to be an emotional response. We can't deny that. That is humanity. Hopefully it's humanity. Both love, hate, anger. Again, these are normal emotions. We're not trying to say that these aren't normal, but it's what does that lead to? Again, what we've been talking about the last few weeks is what does hate lead to, right? An outrage, an anger, an ignoring, a not caring for. At some point, that whatever's inside of you goes to a place where then it is a bad situation, right? Does this person still deserve God's love? I see that's really difficult, right? Yeah, and then where does forgiveness come into this? This is tough. This is tough, especially when it's personal, right? Right, it begins to hurt you.
I can't put my hate on someone I'm not face to face.
Right.
So then it just becomes, someone.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that Jesus is making here, right? Is okay, most of us haven't actually committed murder, but look at the same hate in our hearts that was in the person who actually did that physical deed. We're not really that different. But if I'm worthy of God's love and forgiveness and salvation, then so are they. And that is really, there's nothing easy about this. And I've never had to go through this. But it's how do we, long term, how do we really feel toward those people?
I don't hate you, but almost.
Yeah. And that there's not much different there, right? I mean, when you're wanting pain and suffering to come to somebody, that's usually an outcome of your emotion. But yeah, it's, again, we all work through these. It's difficult. It's painful, especially in a very emotional situation.
I think the hard part is realizing that God really is the final authority on all these things. And like this guy, God is going to take care of it. He's the just judge, and we'll know how to take care of that. So someday God is going to fix that. And the hard part is giving it up and realizing you can't really do pain if you want bad things to happen to somebody. That's where you've got to look back and see what kind of attitude that we're supposed to have and try to get there, to try to eventually get to a point after the emotional part is kind of run its course, where we could be loving, where we could be kind if we have to. But don't let it consume you to the point where that's all you're thinking about is, I want something bad to happen to this person. Yeah. But I think the other issue too is that when people do bad things, even if this guy changed and became a Christian, truly, we might not know it, but and he's forgiven by God. That doesn't mean he's not going to face consequences from the world of what he's done. So, I think that, well, he still deserves, even though God's forgiven him and he's okay on that realm, according to what we believe in society, then he still deserves to be in prison for his life. I mean, you can think of it that way, but if you look at it as just, I dislike this so much, I want a bad thing to happen, then I think that's where we've got to really think. We all have that thought in mind sometimes about somebody, but we've got to figure out how to bring it in control and back to what God really wants to do.
Yeah, and there's nothing easy about a situation like this. But it all comes back to, are we worthy of Christ's sacrifice? If that answer is no, across the board, no matter what we have done. And so is everyone. And that's what's difficult about, the invisible, is we're making essentially a judgment on somebody. And that's what's really interesting is how Christ dealt with many of these folks, the invisibles of their society. And the story of blind Bartimaeus from Mark 10, and I'm going to read this. And this is just one example of how Jesus, really saw the invisible, which is very interesting. So from Mark 10, then they came to Jericho as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving a city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, that is the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. And why would they do that? I mean, this is the worthy judgment, right? You know what? Jesus is more important. He's got things to do. He's got people to see. And that's why we would have done it, right? I mean, how do we draw those lines? And we do it quickly without understanding. But here he is. And he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." That had to have been an amazing moment for him, right? The moment before, he's being told to be quiet, stay in your darkness, stay away from people, right? Just stay away. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. Sounds like a very obvious question. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Right? Where are the people in our lives that we're passing by or that we're helping to put somebody off to the side so they're not getting the love of Jesus or the healing of Jesus? So easy to do, to make those quick decisions. But that is something that I think is amazing. And this is one of those stories of Jesus really seeing the invisible person and taking that moment out, even when the other people in his party, we're already doing what we normally do and pushing him to the side. Thoughts on the story? No.
We can't do that, so I think that's the other part, you feel helpless.
Yes.
I don't know how to help you.
Yeah, no, it's never easy. And we don't have the direct healing power that Jesus did. But what else do we have? That's right. And a lot of times, yeah, we feel powerless. We feel like we don't need the help. And that's where, we get into those situations as giving money. Oh, well, there goes his drug habit again. Right. And you just see this in your head. But what can we actually do? But there's so many examples of places for us to get involved where we can actually impact those who are invisible. And are we spending our time doing that as well? You're right. It's the guy in the street. That's a tough one always. But where are there other people in society?
Two things come to mind. One is, sorry.
Just be loud.
Okay. Two sets of people come to mind. And one, the schools generally do a pretty good job of this, but you think about kids who come in and act out, they're at the bus stop or in class or whatever. A lot of times they're struggling with something at home, or they don't have food, like really basic needs. And so just being alert to that type of thing, I think it's important, kids, friends, and whatnot. But also I was thinking about the people in the checkout lines, the people before us and behind us, and the people behind the registers. So many times now we have our phones out and we're doing something on our phone. We don't even read the person who's at the register or in front of us or behind us. And that's an easy way to offer encouragement and reach out to someone.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have an opportunity to do something more.
Yeah. Again, it's how we treat the everyday people, right? The waitresses or the waiters, the checkout people, the nurses and the doctors. Went to pick up something for Jenna at Ergo Care yesterday or whatever it's called. And, a guy came in and said, I think he said, I just have a sore in my mouth. And they're like, try sometime next week. We're completely booked. The Ergo Care. They're like, with all the COVID cases and testing, he can't even walk in. You could just see his face like, uh-oh. He's got nowhere to go if he's working normal hours during the week. It's gotten tough. And a lot of these workers in so many different areas are taking so much heat. So it's how do we treat all of these people? And if Jesus can see them and his power is in us, we should also be able to do that. Okay. Which leads us to chapter 21. And this is very similar to an early chapter. If Jesus was serious, then we will need more than rules to become godly. And one of the earlier chapters was there's a difference between doing good and being good. There's a lot of similarities to this, but in the picture here, if you guys can see that, it's about guardrails, right? When we're learning to drive, a guardrail can be really helpful. But once you've gotten better, the need for those guards may not be there. Just like bowling, right? How many people do better with the bumpers up in bowling? I do. It doesn't matter. There's at least some time during your bowling game that one is going to go into the gutter no matter how good I try to be, right? It just helps us to keep us going where we need to be going from time to time. And it's the same way, right? It's the unrighteous that need the guardrails. The righteous, theoretically shouldn't need that. So was there a time in your life that guardrails were important for you? As a child, yeah. As we're learning life. Yeah. I'm sorry? Around learning to drive? Yeah. There's just that those way to know where to go, right? There's so many different times, yeah, right? Learning to drive in a country that you drive on the opposite side of the road. It was really nice to have clear guidelines, guide rails, arrows on the streets.
Even more recently, learning how to navigate COVID in public. They had all those, remember at Walmart, they had the different
arrows.
Well, arrows, they had paved and people directing, and they have stickers on the floor to show you how far 6 feet is apart. I mean, that was all very helpful in helping to modify the behavior that understands, the parameters.
Yeah. Have you noticed a difference in your life when you transition from guardrails to not guardrails? In whatever you were doing, how, like in your children, think of your children, right? You give them more freedom. Sometimes that goes well, they make those right decisions. Sometimes, they're trying to find out how fast their car can go. Or they want to take an exit ramp that you weren't hoping they would take. Same with us, right? Those guardrails of life, and that's a lot of what the Old Testament is God was really trying to put those clear guardrails in place. And then in the New Testament, it's about being more righteous and making more of your own decisions. But that, how well do we do there? Sometimes we do okay, sometimes we don't. Yeah, and where are you in your life with the guardrails? Do you need them more right now? Or do you feel like God is leading you appropriately?
I think it depends sometimes on where you are in your life. You may need them again. Because for some reason, it seems like we can't, I'll say we, but I can't stay as strong as I want to be all the time. And I'll find myself in a place where I need the guardrails again, which is, the only way you're going to get that, I think, is prayer and going back in and reminding yourself what God says about things.
Yeah.
You can just about open the Bible anywhere and pick the right spot, find something. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How often have you felt, oh, I'm actually driving pretty well right now in either a car or life? And all of a sudden that curve comes way faster than you expected it to, or something blindsides you in just your daily, and immediately your response is anger or frustration or hate, or you fall back into something that you really thought you had better control of.
Anytime there's change or something new in your life, change what they're doing in the company,
Yeah.
such as that work, or a new child. So any change, it doesn't be a big change.
No.
I'm gonna change it, and I become fearful. So I need those guardrails.
That's right. Yeah, change is always a huge one, and change is constant, obviously. But yeah, it's the part of life that throws us off. It is, right. Yeah, and that's a great point. At what point do guardrails no longer matter in your life? And I think the point is we always need those guardrails. Sometimes we throw them off and we think we can do it, but some guardrails really do help us as we go through life. It helps our children. It helps us. I mean, yes, we would like to be perfectly righteous and not need them, but we know we're not.
Diet and exercise,
What's with that?
Yeah. I mean, you know how to eat right, but then something happens, and you eat a lot, you gain weight, and then you go back on it, a modified, and you put some restrictions in place to help you, give you some guardrails, kind of get you back in line. Same with, exercise. Okay, I'm going to start small. I'm going to walk around the block once a day. Just little things to kind of help usher us into where it becomes like from the inside, where you're like, oh, I feel better when I eat better. But at first you have to kind of like make yourself do that, and then it becomes more.
Okay, this makes me think about like at first you have those rules and guardrails, and you follow them because they are rules, and that's what God wants you to do. That's what the Bible says. But then as you grow, you do those things that God wants you to do because you want to, because you love
That's right.
Not necessarily because you have to.
That's right.
I throw it, it becomes more, yes, we do still need those guardrails, but,
Yeah.
but maybe something different.
That's right. Yeah, the motivation for needing the guardrails hopefully change, right? We're doing things not just because it's a rule, but because of love of the one who is trying to guide us in a certain direction. But again, yeah, I'm not sure we ever totally outgrow guardrails. At least I haven't yet. So I don't know. We'll find out. And I think that's what Dean was saying as well, is we sometimes need those at different points in our life. So we are going to go on to the next section here, but I'm assuming we're going to start back because this, I was wondering how fast we would get here, but obviously we didn't get here quite so fast. So chapter 22 is a fun one. If Jesus was serious, then lust is a choice. So we've got a lesson on lust. Excellent, huh? But before that, should we talk about lust or should we talk about responsibility? I think that's maybe where we need to start as we talk about this. Who's actually responsible for my actions? You're going to say it's you? Yeah. Yeah. But that's not usually the first place we go, right? We blame, I just think of our kids when they misbehave. How many times is it actually their fault? Oh. I mean, yes, the time I'd hit my brother, well, it's because of what he did first, right? It's an outside factor, right? It's your parents. They're too restrictive. My culture, look, I can't get away from this. And therefore, you know, it's become me. Or is it actually my responsibility? We're so easy to blame anybody by it ourselves. And so when was the last time you actually took true responsibility for your actions? I don't know. That's sometimes harder to think of than it should be. My wife will probably tell you that too. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, do we actually do that very often? No, because it's hard, right? We don't like hard. Nothing about it. No, we're happy in any way to not take responsibility for our own actions. So, got to have some humor. It's been a heavy subject, right? So here, a woman sues McDonald's after burger ad compelled her to break her Lent fast. Yes, this is true. So again, this is in Russia, or else I'd pronounce her name better. Ksenia claims she was lured in indulging in a juicy McDonald's burger, and now she's not loving it. Come on, there's good humor. Claims that seeing a mouth-watering cheeseburger commercial made her break her fast during Lent. When I saw an advertising banner, I could not help myself, she said, who's an Orthodox Christian, no doubt. It was an unhappy meal. Come on, that's funny too. Suing McDonald's for compensation, right, for breaching consumer protection laws in Russia, as well as insulting her religious feelings. Who is responsible for this? McDonald's, obviously. I mean, but okay, this seems ridiculous. But how often are we blaming somebody else for breaking our fast? Right? How often is it the news media's fault for why I'm riled up? Why is it my kid was grumpy this morning, so now I'm grumpy, right? It's not my fault. Traffic was bad, right? I didn't get my food. I didn't get my French fries. My French fries aren't hot. I mean, this can go on forever. When is it ever my responsibility? It seems ridiculous, but this is how we act towards a lot of things, right? And it's just great every once in a while to have such a ludicrous example for maybe to bring our head back around to focus on whose responsible it actually is. And I'm sure it was a good McDonald's meal for her. Right? So we're going to really kind of end here, and then we're going to jump back into the subject. But this is from James 1. And I really want you to think about this as we go through this week, so we can talk about this next week. So when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when by his own evil desire he's dragged away and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. This has always been a tough one for us to understand. It feels like sometimes that God is testing us. But is he the one truly tempting us? Or are we being led truly away by our desires? And what's interesting here is the desire by itself isn't necessarily the bad thing. Now, there can be an evil desire, but it's what is next. He's dragged away and enticed. How do we stop that desire from dragging us away and enticing us? When that McDonald's ad came on, I don't know if she was sitting at home, whether she was driving, whether she was walking along the street and walked next to the McDonald's, and all of a sudden saw that picture, right? Something had to drag her away and entice her. And we let that happen. So how do we deal with that? And then we're going to get into the very specific topic of lust. And I think it's pretty interesting. It's pretty important for us to discuss. But thank you for your time today. So think about this. Come back next week ready to provide some interesting insight into this section. So great. Thanks, everybody.